That is my favourite button. Only on the chair's microphone does it have the little beep beep sound, just saying, welcome to the meeting. So, good afternoon, colleagues. Ben, are we live streaming?
Yes, we are.
Yes, we are. Wonderful. Thank you very much. So, good afternoon. Welcome to the Climate, Energy and Environment Committee today. Apologies for starting a few minutes late. Part of the reason has been trying to assess which of our members are going to be able to be in attendance today due to a flooding event, which is preventing some of our councillors from Calderdale and Bradford to arrive. And as we were saying, if there is one committee that perhaps doesn't need convincing of the impact on climate change, it is this one, yet we seem to have many issues with climate change related things. So I'm informed that we are quorate, which we will get to when we come and start with the apologies. So let's move to that now, Ben, if we could just have apologies for our absence.
Sure thing. We've had apologies today from Councillor Swift, Councillor Hemingway, Councillor Widdowson, John Clark, Simon Pringle, Adrian Gill, Councillor Patient and Councillor Ferraby.
And yet, even with those apologies, we are quorate and ready to go.
Yes, we are, yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. And I should say, special apologies with Councillor Swift not being able to attend. That's why I, as Deputy Chair, am chairing this meeting today. So, item number 2, declaration of any disposable pecuniary interest relating to this agenda item today, beyond anyone's register of interests. Are there any declarations to make? No. There's nothing exempt on the agenda, so the whole meeting will be in public today. So moving to item 4, the minutes of our last meeting held on the 4th of October. Are there any comments or additions or amends to what's been circulated with the pack? I'm not seeing any, so are we happy to approve those? And I will sign those offline. Yes, we are. That's great. So if we move to item 5 now, which is the climate and environment monitoring indicators. And I think this is the start of our agenda today, but it very much continues from the last meeting. And I think Peter is going to come and talk about some of the questions that we raised at the last time, provide a couple of answers on those, and we're also going to be talking about the cost of living crisis here. And I think in particular, I would like to just spend a couple of minutes talking about the energy bill discount scheme, which is a new scheme that was announced by the government yesterday, just to make sure our committee members are up to speed with that. So to start with that, Peter, could I pass to you for item 5, please? And apologies, colleagues, could I remind everyone just to use the microphone as we are in a live meeting? Thank you.
Certainly. So with regard to the main state of the region indicators that are in the appendix, there have been no changes to report since the last meeting, so the data's not changed. Since our intention with those indicators is only to report by exception, I'm not proposing to go through them today because we've done that previously, unless anyone has any questions about any of those state of the region indicators. If not, I'll proceed to some of the questions that were raised last time in the meeting and the sort of response to them, which is detailed in the paper as well. So one question was around how do we explain West Yorkshire's lower emissions per capita figure as compared with the national average. And we do have a slide in the pack that addresses that, which is figure 3 on page 18. But I'll just bring that up on screen, hopefully, so people can see that. So just a reminder that the West Yorkshire per capita emissions figure for greenhouse gases is 4.5 tonnes of CO2 equivalent per person, and the national average is 5.1. So West Yorkshire is lower, and this figure 3 visualisation makes the reasons clear for those differences. So the main differences are agricultural emissions are 0.37 tonnes per person lower than nationally, and emissions from industry are 0.18 tonnes lower than nationally. So you can see it's industry and agriculture that explains that difference. Per capita domestic emissions are slightly higher in West Yorkshire, but nowhere near enough to offset those other two sectors that I mentioned. So hopefully that brings clarity to that question, which wasn't able to answer at the previous meeting.
Thank you, Peter. And maybe if I may just ask the obvious question, do we know why agriculture and industry are so much lower here?
So in terms of agriculture, the level of agricultural activity and employment is lower within West Yorkshire than nationally, so we don't have a big agricultural sector. In terms of industry, West Yorkshire has got slightly less of those sort of big industrial operations that tend to be energy intensive. So if you're comparing with, say, South Yorkshire and the steel industry, that is less well represented in West Yorkshire. So I think that is the reason for that. Put that back on. So the committee also asked us to present more data on renewable electricity generation. So more detail around trends. I'm just scrolling through some slides here, which we're able to do. So within your papers, this is figure 10 to 14 on page 26 to 30. What I've also done is added in new figures for 2021 that have been more recently published. But that also means that the retrospective revisions to the previous year's data that we presented last time. But this first chart shows you the importance of onshore wind in Calderdale and plant biomass in Wakefield to renewable electricity generation. And in fact, the Calderdale onshore wind contributes 39%, according to the base figures. But in terms of the trends, you can see from this chart that the overall trend in generation,
Sorry, Peter, I think we had a question on the previous chart from Gideon, and I just wanted to bring Gideon in.
Yeah, thank you. The onshore wind and the biomass, we've had quite a lot of political and policy change. So is there any way we could see that on a year-by-year basis? Because I think that would show considerably what is actually happening in those sectors, if that's possible.
I've got a slide that's just coming up that hopefully will address that and be interested in your comments. So this is the overall trend for renewable electricity generation across West Yorkshire. You can see it's not a smooth upward trend. Generation in 2021 was 21% higher than in 2014, but it's 28% below its peak in 2018. So it's not a smooth sort of progression. And this chart shows you the sort of position, the trend in terms of those different sources of renewable electricity generation over time. And you can see again that it's not a smooth progression. And in fact, most notably, landfill gas generation has fallen down quite significantly. And also, if you look at the next chart, when we look at the overall trends by local authority, you can see again that it's not a smooth progression. So Kirklees and Leeds in particular have seen dramatic falls.
Can we go back a slide?
Yep.
So what are we to do? Sorry, this is just a question. When I look at this, what I think I'm looking at, I'm slightly surprised that photovoltaics have gone down. So that's sort of that's a bit of a head scratcher, because logically they should be relatively new assets, and that should have been building. Onshore wind, I'm guessing, but I suspect that the fact that it looks like, have I got this right? It is going down, isn't it? Yeah. So that looks like maybe that's much older turbines just coming off and not being replaced because of government policy. Put hydro to one side, anaerobic to one side. Landfill gas strikes me as explainable because I suspect that's tied to old coal sites. So that just is what it is. You can't do much about it. But when I sort of look at it, the one that sticks out, we can't do much about onshore wind because of national policy, but the PV one's a bit of a surprise, if I'm being honest. So that's what I'm seeing when I see that. I've seen a couple of nods as I've said those things. What are others thinking?
That feels like feed tariff coming off at that point, even the time period of it, and it was sloping down and dropping. It went away, so it's probably that that's actually affected. But it just demonstrates that if we want to have policies, I was going to mention this about the onshore wind side of it. It just sort of demonstrates that national policy can have a massive influence on us, and we need to work out how we can actually influence that. So I'll talk about the onshore in a minute, hopefully.
Okay, let's note those comments. Leah, if it's on this, come back, and then could I suggest we just let Peter sort of finish this section of
It was just really quick. Is it about the number of turbines or photovoltaic cells, or is it simply that there hasn't been as much sunshine or wind? It's probably a stupid question.
So if you look at the UK figures, there was a 9% fall in renewable electricity generation between 2020 and 2021. And one of the explanations for that is reduced rainfall, wind and sunshine hours was one of the contributing factors to that. So that is a factor, but I think one of the points I was going to come on to is that the figures do look quite anomalous. So we've asked BEIS just to, to identify whether there might be reasons. The figures are quite complex, so if a particular site is reassigned geographically or something like that, then it can have an impact. Or if data can be suppressed for individual sites as well, so that could have an impact. So we're working through that as well. So we've done the local authority. So yeah, and also you can see the picture by local authority here, where there has been a decline in Calderdale, for example, between 2020 and 21, but big declines for Kirklees and Leeds, you can see there. Now, if you look at the figures for capacity as well, which are also available, you can see that is also reflective for Kirklees and Leeds, which might shed some light on the picture. And then if you look at Leeds individually, sorry, I've only done Leeds for the purposes of this, but we could replicate this for the other local authorities and share that information. You can see that there are some very sharp changes there, so it could be partly data issues rather than changes in the actual circumstances. So that's the end of that section. If there are any further questions on that one.
Gideon.
Do we have any data, or could we find out any data on planning applications that went through for onshore wind that weren't actually developed? I know in 2015, when they had the change of policy, we had, I have a wind company, but everyone was in the same boat. We had a huge amounts of planning applications sitting there waiting to do something, and then it died instantly. I'm wondering if there's an opportunity there to look at that data and see whether there's any opportunities.
I don't know much about the planning system, but we can certainly look into that and see whether that information's available. In theory, it should be. You would think.
Okay,
Well, have a chat with you offline on that one.
Thank you for that suggestion, Gideon. Also, Peter, on the Leeds lines, that there are some that just seem to stop in 2018. So I guess just so we're reassured that it isn't a data issue, and things haven't just stopped, is it possible just to take an action to just update this committee if in fact we do find that there's a data issue? Because I think we are possibly in danger of having a conversation about trends that may not be trends if data just stops on data points. So just making sure that we're clear on the robustness of the underlying data, I think, would be helpful.
Yep, can do that, certainly.
Okay, any other questions on that point, Peter, or are you going to move on, I think, to some other suggested additional indicators?
There was one other question last time about biomass. I haven't got a slide for it, but so there's a concern that the figures that were presented included DRACs, but we were able to confirm that wasn't the case. We think the biomass generation in Wakefield will probably be the Ferrybridge multi-fuel power station. But there are 4 biomass sites in Wakefield, so there could be other sort of contributors to that. But that from what we can find out, that seems to be the case, unless members of the committee know otherwise. So, as you mentioned, the committee asked us to explore availability of data in respect to some additional indicators. So I'll move on to those now. So what we've done is summarise what we think the position is regarding availability in the paper, but we've also provided visualisations of the data that are available. So first of all, there was a request for information on renewable heat. There are 2 main sources on renewable heat. There's data from the Renewable Heat Incentive Scheme, which is now defunct, so that data is increasingly becoming out of date. but there's also data from energy performance certificates on fuel type and method of heating. So that EPC data would provide an ongoing source of information on the situation around the kind of installed base of different sort of heating systems and the use of renewable energy in heating systems. So what I've included here, just for completeness, is some of the renewable heat incentive data, but I'm not going to go into that, but we can provide more information if people are interested. But moving on, looking at the energy performance certificate data, figures show a very small percentage of dwellings have renewable heat in West Yorkshire. I've actually drilled down in this next chart to show you the proportion of dwellings that either have renewable energy as a main source or have renewable energy such as heat pumps, or they have two or more energy sources including renewable energy. And you can see that the second category is much the bigger. So almost 0.5% of dwellings in Kirklees are reported to have renewable energy as one of the sources. So, but the figures are still, the proportions are still very small. It's important to note with the EPC data that the data relate to the point in time that the certificate was lodged. So in many cases that will be some time ago, so the situation could have changed in case of particular dwellings. What we probably would report in future is the quarterly data, the quarterly lodgements data. So new data is available each quarter for the latest lodgements. So we can see what the trends over time for that are. So that's something we could do in future. It's also worth mentioning that census data on central heating type was published last week as well. And that gives you a picture of what's happening in 2021 rather than the EPC data, which will relate to whenever the dwelling lodged its certificate. So an EPC data only covers around 64% of properties, whereas the census picture is more complete. That census picture shows that 0.9% of households use renewable energy for heating, so about 5,500 households in total.
Thank you, Peter. And Richard, I think we've got a question there.
Yeah, well, it's more of a question. It's possibly a statement. This is very useful data, but I'm looking at thinking, what do we do with it? What do we do with it? What do we do with it? And I guess in my mind, my end in mind is, this is a bigger point than just this data set, is what are we going to be famous for in this combined authority? Is one of our metrics going to be that we will have a higher than national average domestic renewable heat systems? Ergo, the data we get then starts to drive forward whatever those sort of net zero ambitions are. So it's more of a, what do we do with this data and what are we comparing it against and where do we take the data, basically is really my observation.
Thank you, Richard, and entirely agree that is a very logical next question for that. Do we have a view, Liz?
I think it's a very good question, and we have specifically on the agenda the Better Homes Hub discussion item, where I think particularly this around how we support greater insulation around domestic heating is exactly that question. So if we may come back to that, Chair, as part of that, and your ideas and suggestions about how we can use Better Homes Hub to do that would be great.
Great. Thank you, Liz. And Andrew?
I think if we looked at the tenure of these properties which are getting renewable heat, you'd find that they're mainly social housing, and it's that I think that is actually quite interesting, because it's about when we actually go for air source heat pumps actually going into the owner occupied sector. In terms of understanding what the information means, I think I know the properties in Kirklees that have air source heat pumps. I can take you to them, you know, which is bad, isn't it? You really shouldn't be able to take people to every property which has got an air source heat pump. You know, there's not that much take up. So I think one of the things which would add an awful lot to this data would be to get tenure sort of breakdown as well, because it would show, you know, the take up when the take up gets into the owner occupied sector.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. And I think also, you know, reflecting on those, at best in Kirklees it's 1 in 200 homes, and otherwise it's 1 in 500. If we do want to be known, for example, as Richard was saying, as, you know, the place in the country for renewable energy, how much of a impact can that have on our net zero ambition? and therefore is that one of the strategies that we want to do. So I think if we link all of those points together at the Better Home Hub, but I think that's some really useful contextual data on that. So thank you, Peter. Do you want to continue with some of the other indicators?
Will do, and we do. I think we do have data on by tenure as well as central heating systems, so we can cross-tabulate that. So there was also a request for information around local electricity demand met by renewables. So the best we can do on this one is to look at electricity consumption in West Yorkshire and compare it with renewable electricity generation in West Yorkshire. Now this is a crude measure because, of course, West Yorkshire is not a closed energy system, so energy is coming from outside and energy is being routed elsewhere. So it's very much notional, but it gives you an indication of the relative weights. And it shows that local generation is equivalent to about, local renewable generation is equivalent to around 5% of consumption, but that varies significantly by local authority, and you can see that it's by far highest in Calderdale. So that's probably as much as we can do around that, but I suppose it does give a useful indication of the scale of renewable electricity generation.
Sorry, Peter. Leah?
How does that compare with a national figure?
That's a good question. But we could provide it in the sort of future reporting.
And then again, it's what we do with the data and that same thing. Yeah.
Okay. So that covers the indicators for which we've got data. Other indicators for which local level data is not available or doesn't seem to be available, the public versus private sector renewables generation. So people asked if we could split that out. I don't think that's available, but I stand to be corrected. There was also a request for information around food security and self-sufficiency and also food poverty. So there is data around food poverty, obviously, at national level, and also model data that's been produced by University of Sheffield. In terms of this wider issue, and that's at household level, in terms of this wider issue about local areas and their degree of self-sufficiency in terms of food, there are academic studies, but I don't think there is any data that's available to us. And then finally, there was the issue about biodiversity. So I think a number of other areas like Greater Manchester have undertaken biodiversity audits, but I don't think there's any standard data below national level that will be available to us. So that would be an area for further exploration and potentially investment. So that covers off the indicator related stuff.
Thank you, Peter. And I think my summary, if I may, from this is, as a relatively new committee, we have been looking for what's the best data to sort of act as indicators that support our headline indicator, which is progress towards 2038. And I think last meeting we were presented with some good data, but I think as a committee we said actually there are ways that we could get more data to sort of supplement it, and we've come back to that today. I think the danger of a committee is we can always ask for more data, but possibly unless there are any other clear gaps that the committee are suggesting, this is the time to say, okay, well, let's lock in the data that we have and focus more on the interesting questions and the necessary questions of, and so what are we doing, and how do we make sure we can move the lever on certain indicators. So I'm seeing nods as a statement. I just thought it's helpful to sort of reflect that's probably the mood of the committee instead of going for more and more indicators and more data. What this paper didn't say is there a recommendation in specifically which bits of additional information to go? My interpretation is not the ones that we can't get data for, but for the ones that we can, with your comments there, we will include those into the indicator reports. Is that your recommendation, Peter?
I think it is. I mean, the only other option that could be considered is doing more of a sort of holistic analysis of sort of offline, do a holistic analysis of the range of data, because I think we've been a little bit scattergun with suggestions, but maybe doing a more, we don't necessarily have the resource to do it, but it's something to bear in mind around, doing a wider assessment. But
Okay, so happy to take views, and certainly if there's any major omissions here, I'd be sort of keen to hear it. I still feel that the time is now to move into the tangible actions of how we're going to change that headline indicator. But I've got a couple of points. Firstly from Gideon, and then from Katie.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It strikes me that we need to have some targets for these. And if we have the targets, then we can actually look at the monitoring of it against those targets. So it might be worth sort of somehow working out where we think we should be with what we've got or what we could do, especially for wind and heat pumps in particular, which seem to be coming up the agenda, and then mapping it from there. And that way we've got something to go at, because I'm looking at those Calderdale graphs. I bet you that's still the old legacy wind turbines there. We're not actually gaining and developing anything new. So it's probably something that we should consider as an important part of how we get to 2038.
Thank you, Gideon. Absolutely. And with those targets, how much of each indicator is going to make that difference to the headline ambition? Thank you. Councillor Katie.
Yeah, well, I think that's a really important point, and we need to focus on where we're going instead of looking at kind of past data that perhaps isn't relevant to us. But I think the accuracy of it is absolutely fundamental. We've had a bit of discussion about that today, haven't we? If it isn't something that we can rely on and we can say, yes, we know where that comes from, it's not really going to be useful to us.
Thank you, Katie. So my suggestion is we keep this as our sort of first item on the agenda for next meeting, and we sort of come back on some of the points on accuracy targets and other things that we've talked about. But obviously we need to keep coming back to that headline indicator as well as we go. So unless there's anything else on the monitoring, sorry, Jim. Yes.
That one. That's the button. Yeah. Thanks, Mark. I agree with the drift of the conversation. To what extent have we already got those targets or indicators from the pathways work we've already got? I know it's not in the pack today, so I'm racking my brain now to try and work out, well, what have we got here? Because surely that's the point, isn't it? To line up with the investment in time and effort and hard work that's gone into the pathways analysis down to 2038 and linking these indicators to that. So I'm just trying to think. I think we've already got some of the horses we need here to just indicate.
Agree. Can I pass to either Noel or Liz to give an officer perspective on that?
Yeah, I can confirm that we do have within the carbon emissions reduction pathways particular amounts relating to things like solar, the number of heat pump installations, the capacity of wind turbine. In that report, that was modelled in relation to what would be needed to get to our 2038 targets. So we can absolutely align some of those monitoring with what those targets will be. The caveat will be we'll probably be a long way short of what those targets need to be, but it does put it into stark relief, I would expect.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry.
And to add, obviously there's only so much which is within our control, and whilst we do have the 2038 target, which you could say isn't necessarily all in our control, there are certain things that we would want to focus on, and as the projects come forward, we will want to have to be monitoring against how many things that we are actively being able to do, and some things which we have less control over. So I think we just need to be clear about what we mean by targets as part of reaching net zero.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move us on to the second part of the paper, Peter, and for time, and I'm conscious that a lot of this is probably pre-Christmas sort of updates. Cost of living crisis updates. Is there anything specifically you'd like to sort of highlight in that part?
So basically, what we've summarised in the paper is some of the key evidence around fuel poverty, energy efficiency, concerns of business about survivability, and the large number of businesses with energy-intensive operations. And also there's information there about the regional response in terms of the support for businesses with energy efficiency, the £5,000 grants for 50% of project costs, and also the cost of living emergency fund. which will provide £3 million. So I think that's all been publicly announced since the papers went out. So that's the basic sort of context to that.
Thank you, Peter. And as I sort of mentioned in the brief intro, the other thing to add is yesterday's announcement from the government of the new energy bill discount scheme, which will replace the current energy bill relief scheme from the 1st of April this year. We're still sort of trying to dig into as much detail as we can, but it looks like the support will be very much two-tiered. So whilst there will be a general level of support available to all businesses, there will be a greater level of support for those who are operating in, I quote, energy and trade intensive industries. Overall, the amount of support available is down by about 2/3. So the government is saying it's about 5.5 billion instead of 15 billion. And I think, you know, if we put those things together, that the risk for businesses in our region, especially perhaps for some who operate in the culture and nighttime economies, which are not energy intensive but have been hit by the pandemic and are dependent on energy, there will be significantly less support from the 1st of April than what they're currently benefiting from. So it's something that I think we need to keep a very close eye on, not just in this committee, but across the whole of the combined authority. We did have and hold a energy roundtable with some of the larger energy companies and energy intensive users in November this year. The Mayor and I facilitated that conversation. I have written to them today to just get their view on the latest government proposal. But if any of the private sector members here would like to speak to me offline out of the committee about this, we're trying to pull together a response for what else we can do in West Yorkshire and what we might want to do to petition national government for support, you know, both on the business side but also more generally. So I thought it was worth just sort of bringing that up for the sort of committee's attention, and I'm seeing, well, a combination of nods and frowns. Unless there are any specific things, I will move us on to the next item on the agenda. Okay, so the recommendations for that paper specifically, we are noting the headline analysis, and we've talked about the recommendation for the future monitoring indicators, which I think we've sort of made that decision on, and we are noting the current intelligence that you mentioned, Peter, and is detailed in the paper about the autumn statement. So I think we can sort of cover those recommendations in the paper formally. So item 6 is the West Yorkshire Plan, and I'm pleased to see we've got Emma here to sort of talk about this. This is, if I may give a little intro, a sort of a headline, I guess, vision or statement to cover all of the different areas of the combined authority, which would allow us as a region to talk to government and some of our third parties, but also some of the our sort of citizens in the region about what we want to do as West Yorkshire and what we want to be known for. And I think the climate emergency and energy and the environment plays a really important part in the West Yorkshire Plan. So this is a paper that's going around quite a few of the committees in draft form at the moment as a consultation, ready to, I think, become a public document in March time this year. And I'd like to pass to Emma to sort of share more.
Thank you very much. Yes, so set the scene very nicely there for me, thank you. So just taking a little bit of a step back about where this came from, because the powers, the funding that come into the region, we've got a new mayor, things have changed quite a lot for us, and not just as a combined authority, as West Yorkshire, you know, people are talking about West Yorkshire more than they ever have before. So this is really about putting us on the front foot and us being very clear with our partners, with government, about who we are, what we do and what our ambitions are. So rather than us being reactive to whatever government put out there, about us being really clear about what we want and what we do and what our strengths are. And I don't think we've had various documents over the years that have sort of started to do that a little bit, but not maybe as much as this one. This is also about us setting that longer term trajectory, so being clear by 2040, what do we want to be, who do we want, where are we sort of aiming to be? And as Matt said, this is around us talking really to government and to our partners. So although citizens might be interested, that's not the main audience for this document. This is very much around us talking to government, because we've had that feedback quite regularly from government in the past that we don't always speak with one voice. So they talk to different organisations within the region, and we're not all saying the same thing. So this is about trying to develop a story that we can all talk about, that we all feel is ours, so that then when we're all going and having those separate conversations, we might all say something a little bit different, but we've got a core narrative that we all sign up to. So that's really sort of the principles behind it. So it covers a vision for that longer term, that to 2040, a story about what West Yorkshire is, who we are, because people don't always know, do they? Where's West Yorkshire? What's in there? What are we doing? What are the things that have happened in the past, and how are we using those things to help develop that future, that future and that innovation into our future? We've got some elements in there around what we're aiming to achieve. So what do we want to do? So, we've already talked in the last item about that net zero carbon by 2038, and how does that then tie into the other things that we're trying to achieve across our wider policy areas as well? What those targets that we want to achieve to get there. And then there's a section further down at the bottom of the document as well around how that then ties into all the other policies and strategies, because we have a suite of policies and strategies that already exist. This doesn't take away from those. This sits at the top and helps us sort of articulate how those knit together as a region. So what West Yorkshire is as an entity in its own right. And then there's a section at the bottom about what we need to achieve. What do we actually need? So clearly, we've already that's already come out of the previous conversation, we don't have all the things within our grasp in West Yorkshire to deliver what we want to deliver. So actually, what do we also need from our partners and from government to enable that? What are our asks to people? So that's really sort of the principles around the document and where we're set in. Sorry, I haven't had my lunch yet and I haven't put my teeth in. What we're sort of aiming to achieve. We're hoping that this will be a document that stands the test of time and that will sit with us for that longer period. Obviously, there might be tweaks, but really what we're hoping to do is to keep this document as that narrative that we all sign up to and that we all use on a regular basis. So as an attachment, I don't want to talk for ages because I really welcome people's feedback on how they think it's been developing. So as Mark said, we've got as an appendix to the document, we've got the first draft, which I'd really welcome any comments, any feedback. Is there anything that you think is missing or doesn't come out strongly enough? Is there something that you think we need to talk more strongly about? Bearing in mind that obviously this isn't a specific climate document, and it's not about necessarily carbon, but that is a strong theme within it, that is one of the big things that we want to achieve as a region. So I really welcome any feedback. I'll comment, and feel free to come back to me after the meeting as well if I've put you on the spot to ask you then.
Thank you very much, Emma. And I was going to say that the sort of questions in the recommendation are, around content and language used and sort of anything missing and needing to be removed. And I guess if I could encourage the committee to stick to sort of broad themes now, and then any specifics follow up directly to Emma on in particular wording and things. But I think we've got a few hands already, so I'll go to Andrew first, and then Gideon and Richard.
So thanks for this. I think you're entirely right in terms of the need to have that partnership with government. That's key to achieving what we want to do. And we will not achieve what we need to do without having that strong partnership with government. What's possibly missing is defining what that partnership is and what exactly it is we want from government. I think there's also something there about changing the nature of devolution. It's still a top-down relationship. It is not a genuine partnership. They are the providers and we are the receivers. There needs to be something which recognises that it is an equal partnership between national government and the region, and that's something that I think we need to be saying quite strongly. It's almost like the government doesn't really get devolution, isn't it? Which I think it doesn't, but there we go. So I think something that comes out and really says in a very, very clear fashion what it is we want from them, and what it is that we want from the partnership.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. My suggestion is we capture sort of these in threes. I also have a couple of points, Emma, and we can sort of then come at the end. So Gideon, please.
Yeah, thank you. I've got one key point, and that is reading it as a private sector member. This feels very dominated by public sector and the authorities and things like that. I don't feel it really brings out what the the private sector actually will deliver and do, and it's a big part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Gideon. And Richard.
And first, although I agree with that, I think first congratulations. It was, lived here 20 odd years, and it was great to read something that tried to actually capture some of the essence of West Yorkshire. It's better than the leader in the Times today about Leeds, for example. So I think well done. But to turn to net zero, the point of this script, and this is not actually. I think when I read it, it provoked the following thoughts. I don't think this document is the place for what I'm about to say. So, I don't think it's anyone's fault, but to go to what Councillor Cooper said, the combined authority or the private sector partners or a combination of both need to start being bolder and need to be clearer and start to make choices as to how we're going to get to net zero, and to say very clearly where we cannot do it ourselves. I can almost see a visual diagram that has a picture of national things that will influence net zero, things we'd like to be famous for to get us on that journey. For example, one of the obvious areas, because we're making a lot of progress, is around better homes, social housing. So I would suggest already, if you're going to list things to be famous for, that'd be one of them. George is here. District heating might be another one. Like, let's pick the easy ones. We're actually pretty good at it already as a starter. But there might be others. It might be hydrogen. Look at the attempts Bristol have made. A few false starts. But they've gone off and tried to get a partnership with someone like Octopus across a wider piece. It's been a bit of a disaster as far as I can tell. But they had the ambition. Aberdeen have done a deal on buses, hydrogen buses with BP, of all people. When has this committee discussed these sorts of opportunities to really be a leader in the region? In the short time I've been back on it again, the answer is it hasn't. I'm being deliberately provocative when I say this has nothing to do with the paper. Basically, so the point, so imagine this infograph saying UK-wide things that we can do nothing about unless you help us with the devolution deal. Things we've chosen to be famous for. Doesn't mean we ignore everything else. If there's other grants around, that's great. And then almost a third basket of, if you were going to change it tomorrow and give us more powers, this is what it might look like. But I'm getting a bit frustrated seeing these targets and not actually seeing the groundwork and architecture and ambition that goes with it. And it's easy for the private sector to say that, but that's how I feel looking at these papers. So that's my rant over.
If your rant's over, if you turn the microphone off, I think this is exactly the space to be provocative. As a committee, we are the body at West Yorkshire to talk about, climate, energy, environment, tackling the climate emergency, and this is an agenda item to talk about, West Yorkshire vision. So I, really encourage the challenge here for us to be bold and specific about what we can do locally and what we need to see nationally, and sort of commit to the actions that are led by targets. So sort of thank you for those comments so far. Emma, I'm just going to sort of add a couple more, if I may, and then give you the opportunity to sort of come back, and I'll pass to Katie as well. If I was reading the paper with climate, energy and environment hat on, and I'm conscious I will see this in some other committees and make other comments, I think there is obviously words about climate, emergency and energy. There is less wording around renewable energy and the role of renewable energy that could be made for our vision. And I also was sort of looking at this through a lens of where do we start to talk about the resilience we need to the impact of climate change. Topically today, we have a couple of members of our committee who are not able to be here because of flooding in the area. But what are the other things that we need to make sure so that we are resilient to whatever happens beyond the control of our organisation here? So there are a couple of points I was going to make. Katie?
Yeah, first of all, I absolutely agree with that. We need to be bold and we need to recognise what's in our control and what isn't. Otherwise, it just becomes a page full of words in a way. I think it's really good to see that there's a mention of skills in there, but one of the things that comes up later on the agenda today is the green skills agenda. So whether that could be linked with the work on climate so that it's fundamentally an ambition of ours. I think that's something that we could lead the way on and we should lead the way on. and we ought to be explicit about it. And you're absolutely right. You know, let's shout about the things that we are doing and we're doing well, but put them in a different place from the things that we can't achieve without help. The other thing I was going to say was resilience, and you've done that.
Excellent. Well, I can't see any other hands. So, Emma, I'll just sort of pass back to you just to an opportunity to sort of respond in a collective there.
Yeah, they're really helpful comments, thank you. And I think it's really, I love the challenge of being more bold. It's not always easy, and we'll have to take a balance across all the different committees as well, because I'm sure we'll get different comments I want to be able to take on board what everybody says, but realistically we probably can't, because it's going to have to be quite a succinct document as well, otherwise it will get too long. So what we're doing next is we are going around every committee, as we said at the beginning, and then we will be bringing it all back together to go to the CA and publishing it as part of the CA papers, hopefully at the March meeting. But I was sorry, I did want to come back on Councillor Cooper's point about devolution. Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to bring that out more strongly, particularly that last section around what we need and what that means for us. And I think we've started to have those discussions with government actually around what devolution, next stage of devolution might look like. We're very early stages, but you know they are starting to think about that. I think there's challenges ahead while we sort that out with them actually. Yeah, but I would think that we've got a lot more we could write into that, which is probably a missing element, so that's really helpful. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Emma. I think our next meeting as a committee is the 21st of March, so my assumption is we will probably miss the sort of combined authority meeting where this will be presented. So I think just as a question on the committee, we've got these comments. How will we be best kept apprised of any future drafts and have the opportunity to input in the future?
Really happy to recirculate after we've got the copy before it goes to the Combined Authority Forum if people would like to see that version. And really happy if people have further comments or further thoughts for people to come back to me by email if you'd like to, or to have a private session with people if they would find that useful.
Great, thank you for those offers. And Gideon, you just wanted to make a point at the end.
Yeah, just one point. Given that it is going to be, a lot of challenges for you in terms of what people want, we are cross-party, across the sectors and everything we do, and we need to be mindful that certain elements of what you're doing might actually push up the carbon emissions if we're not careful. So it'd be really useful to have an overview of that before we start doing it, or seeing where something else is going to offset it.
Okay, thank you. And I'm taking Emma's nods as a sort of agreement with that point as we go. So thank you very much. Right, if there are no further comments on that, I'll move us to item 7, which is the Better Homes Hub. And we have a range of presenters for sort of talking about this, which I think is going to be quite a substantive agenda item for us today. And I would in particular like to welcome Martin Broadhurst to the table, where I have requested his attendance as a subject matter expert today on this, and he will be sort of part of the presenting hub. So I am going to pass to Nadia. I think that's hello, Nadia. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, it's a bit of a team effort, so thanks, colleagues. Martin, do you want to just say a few words about and introduce yourself?
Sure.
And then we'll kick off.
Sure, okay, thank you, Nadia. I'm Martin Broadhurst. I'm here on behalf of the West Yorkshire Housing Partnership today. We have been involved in developing the Better Homes Hub along with colleagues from other parts of the housing sector in West Yorkshire. George is here as well today. And we've been sort of involved in it for a year or more, although to be fair, the origins of it go back probably 3 years or more, and actually reflect work that's been going on nationally, and also has the origins in the Scaling Up Better Homes Yorkshire report that the Combined Authority commissioned 2 years ago now, no, longer than that. So yeah, I'm here on behalf of the West Yorkshire Housing Partnership. It's really to represent the contribution that the social housing sector can and is making to the Better Homes Hub programme. A bit later on in the presentation, I'll speak about how we're involved directly in the delivery of retrofit, both as an early adopter and as a market maker, about how the sector can both contribute to and benefit from the one-stop shop concept that you're going to hear about, and also how we're potentially a key anchor organisation in area-based retrofit programmes that are proposed, helping to build critical mass and confidence in those localities.
Brilliant. Thanks, Martin. So I think this is my first time coming to committee, so I don't know a lot of people, so nice to meet you. I'm Nadia McPherson and I am a programme lead in the Energy and Environment team at the Combine Authority and working predominantly on the Better Homes Hub. So in this agenda item, with the help of my colleagues Sarah and Ariba, we will provide you with a bit of an update on the Better Homes Hub, and hopefully there'll be opportunity at the end for some questions. Next slide, please, Ben. Thanks. So in terms of what we'll cover, I'll provide some of the context around the Better Homes Hub, including challenges and opportunities, and then hand over to my colleague Sarah to run through the objectives and proposed activities for the Hub. And Sarah and Ariba will also provide updates on two projects, so the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund and the Manningham Pilot Project. And just before we get into the meat of the presentation, just a quick note that an item on the Better Homes Hub was brought to committee last March. There might be some information that's duplicated through this presentation, so we're quite conscious that there are some new committee members and also not all committee members were in attendance in the last meeting. So apologies if you've heard some of this before, but hopefully it's still useful. Next slide, please, Ben. So what is the Better Homes Hub? It's a programme to scale up domestic retrofit in the region to help us deliver against our climate emergency commitments of net zero by 2038, to alleviate fuel poverty by reducing the energy demand of homes, and also provide a long-term commitment to domestic retrofit, which will give the market confidence to invest in training existing staff, but also taking on new staff. Next slide, please, Ben. Although retrofitting homes is a national priority, we do have some regional challenges, which I think it's important to highlight. So over 26% of the region's carbon emissions come from domestic buildings, and the majority of this is due to burning fossil fuels for heating. So 79% of our homes are connected to the gas network. 23% of our homes were built pre-1919 and are classed as being very old. This is higher than the national average, and these are typically less well insulated and often more difficult to retrofit. Only 34% of the region's homes have an EPC of C or better, compared with 40% nationally. And fuel poverty is also more widespread in West Yorkshire than nationally. So the latest available data from the State of the Region 2022 shows that around 176,000 households in West Yorkshire are in fuel poverty, and that's about 18% of our homes. And the current energy crisis is further compounding this, with latest forecasts suggesting that 30% of households could be in fuel poverty this winter despite government support. The finance required to retrofit West Yorkshire homes has been estimated at £2.4 billion per year at its peak of delivery, and there's not enough funding coming from central government to support this regional ambition. And the funding that is available is also competitive, and delivery windows are extremely short. Next slide, please. Fundamental to the delivery of retrofit is the workforce who will be manufacturing, designing and installing the projects, and sadly the industry has been decimated by stop-start policy and a lack of long-term policy direction. So as a result, there's limited supply chain and the workforce trained to deliver quality retrofits. And then from a household perspective, they face multiple barriers disincentivising them to undertake a retrofit project, including a lack of knowledge of where to start, uncertainty around how to access trusted advice, high upfront capital costs, a slow return on investment, and the inconvenience caused by the disruption. And the private rented sector is particularly challenging due to the landlord incurring the upfront cost, but the tenant accruing the benefits. And it's around 20% of West Yorkshire's homes that fall into that tenure. Next slide, please, Ben. That's enough of the negatives. So on to some of the more positive stuff. So scaling up retrofit in West Yorkshire can enable a huge reduction in carbon emissions, helping us to get closer to our climate emergency commitments. It can also help to alleviate fuel poverty and the wider cost of living crisis. So a new report from the Northern Housing Consortium assessed the potential energy annual energy bill savings for band D to F homes if they were to be improved to a band C. And these potential savings are significant and are shown on the slides. Scaling up retrofit will create new employment opportunities for people in the region. So the Scaling Up Better Homes Yorkshire report estimated that 30,000 well-paid jobs could be created. And retrofitting homes will also improve the quality of the region's housing stock and the health outcomes of residents. And the impact of cold homes is estimated to cost the NHS £2 billion every year in England and Wales. Next slide, please, Ben. In terms of the kind of why now, so delaying retrofit activity locks residents into higher energy costs for the long term. It also eats further into our carbon budget and puts us at risk of not delivering on our commitments. If we are to achieve net zero by 2038, there are only 15 years left, and it's been estimated that we need to retrofit 680,000 homes in the region. So if we started now, that works out at 45,000 retrofits a year. And this number will only increase, obviously, the closer we get to 2038. As already discussed, we need to show the supply chain that we're serious about our long-term commitment to retrofit, send them the right signals, giving them the confidence to create green jobs, train new staff and upskill existing staff. Next slide, please, Ben. So I just want to really quickly touch on two key pieces of evidence that we've got in the region for retrofit and also the climate emergency. So we've already talked about it a bit today, the Carbon Emission Reduction Pathways study, which was completed by Element Energy. So their modelling estimated that to get to net zero by 2038, we need a blend of thermal efficiency measures, low carbon heating, and solar PV. In terms of the numbers, as I stated on the previous slide, it's estimated that 680,000 homes would need to be retrofitted to an EPC C or better. We would also need to install 665,000 heat pumps and 171,000 solar PV systems. Next slide, please, Ben. We also have the Scaling Up Better Homes Yorkshire report, which was produced by Red Consultancy, the University of Salford, and the Sustainable Housing Action Partnership. This report gives us a really clear route to scaling up retrofit in the region and will be a really valuable resource for us in scoping the Better Homes Hub. In this report, the consortium stressed the importance of taking a whole house approach to retrofit in order to reduce energy bills, tackle fuel poverty, and critically avoid any unintended consequences. It also explored the cost of retrofit works, which is indicated by the figure on the left hand on the slides. But do note that these are a few years old, so the costs are likely to be a bit out of date and a bit higher. However, what I think it demonstrates that's important is that the cost of retrofit is an exponential curve, and that the final 20% of carbon emission reduction can be really costly, which we need to bear in mind for the Better Homes Hub. Due to the lack of capacity in the retrofit industry, the report argued for a whole house retrofit programme that starts at a smaller scale while the supply chain is being developed and the workforce created, and that's shown on the right-hand side of the screen. Next slide, please, Ben. So it's clear that we've got a lot of work to do, but a lot of good work has been and is being done in the region to retrofit homes. I'm sure I haven't managed to capture all of the activity, so if there's a project that you've been involved with, sorry if it's not on the slide. But I thought it was important to show that we're not starting from scratch, so we've had the likes of the Energy Company Obligation Funding, which has delivered measures to over 130,000 homes in the region. The region has also secured local authority delivery and social housing decarbonisation funding, and there's hopefully more to come with a decision on Wave 2 expected soon. And it's worth noting that some of these projects will have been fairly light touch, sadly, so particularly the Energy Company Obligation projects. These are commonly single or maybe two measures, rather than looking at a whole house retrofit. So sadly, we can't assume that almost 150,000 homes are now fit for purpose. Next slide, please. To facilitate delivery of retrofit projects, we've had the Better Homes Yorkshire Procurement Framework, which was established in 2014. So in the first 5 years, over 5,500 domestic property retrofits were delivered through the framework, saving around 200,000 lifetime tonnes of carbon at a value of over £23 million. The existing framework expires in March of this year, so we will be publishing an invitation to tender later this month to establish its successor. It's a good opportunity because there were some gaps in the existing framework which we hope to address in the next iteration. So currently it's a single supplier framework What we want to establish will have multiple suppliers on it, giving us more flexibility and resilience, and there's also no mechanism currently in place to deliver retrofit advice. Next slide, please, Ben. So on to what the Better Homes Hub is and what it will achieve. So it's a regional programme to scale up domestic retrofit, and its proposed vision is that everyone in West Yorkshire can live in a warm, comfortable and low-carbon home. Next slide, please, Ben. Just wanted to clarify what we mean by retrofitting a home. So it's really taking that approach from the carbon emissions reduction pathway study that firstly you improve the thermal efficiency and air tightness of the home with the likes of loft insulation, external and internal wall insulation, improved windows and so on. It also involves installing a low carbon heating system such as a heat pump, and where appropriate looking at generating renewable electricity with a solar system. I'll hand over to Sarah now to go through a bit more of the detail about the Better Homes Hub.
Thank you, Nadia. So, could I have the next slide, please, Sam? Sorry, I haven't said next slide for a long time, so I need to get back into the habit of it. So, in order to achieve the vision, there are three broad key objectives. Firstly, to build consensus within West Yorkshire on the priorities for retrofit, but also the consistency of offer. So our vision is very much based on everyone within West Yorkshire, and we want them to have a consistent offer and to have access to that. The second objective is to deliver retrofit projects in West Yorkshire that build momentum. And, you know, we're hearing what you're saying, you need to see momentum, you need to see things happening. That momentum will help strengthen the supply chains, which are at capacity at this moment in time, but will create new delivery models as we start to target different tenures, different challenges that Nadia's already talked about. The third objective is to establish the hub as a trusted organisation for all residents, so to provide that access and information, but to make it applicable to all residents and to try and help everyone have a warmer, more comfortable net zero carbon home. Next slide, please, Sam. So what will it do? Working closely with our district partners, we will deliver some area-based demonstrator projects. These will be across different tenures and different economic situations, trying to identify also different challenges, for example, solid walls, which is a big issue for West Yorkshire. We need to mobilise sufficient public funding for domestic retrofit projects, and we need to review other financial modules to incentivise take-up. There's a lot happening out there at the moment. We need to establish the one-stop shop, and this is going to be providing the high-quality retrofit information and advice that we need, again, focusing on all the different tenures. I think that's it for that. Next slide, please, Sam. So the programme requires the development of some strong foundations. Basically, a steering group with district partners, which has already been established. There'll be a broadening of the delivery partnerships to include key partners such as the social housing providers, and Martin's going to talk about that in more detail. Based on our learnings from the CRF scheme and SHDF, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, delivering those projects, we've got some key learnings, and that says to us we've got key work streams on a comms and resident engagement strategy, a finance and funding strategy, a supply chain strategy, and crucially, provision of accurate and up-to-date data. So those are going to be core foundations for the hub. Next slide, please, Sam. So this sort of tries to encapsulate where the hub is at this moment in time. I'll hand you over to Martin in a minute to talk about social housing, but you can see on the right-hand side, you see that the works that's already in delivery with the social housing providers. In the middle will be the key development of the one-stop shop, and to the left will be the launch of demonstrator projects to help us get that momentum. And one of those will be one of the ones that Leeds has started and that George can talk about. So I think at this stage, can I hand over to Martin to talk about how the social housing providers can play more of a key role?
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, so, can we just go back to the previous slide, please? Social housing providers, I think we've got a role in all three of those areas underneath the Better Homes Hub heading there. I'll start on the right-hand side with the social housing one. Some of the larger social housing providers, Leeds being the prime example, are big enough to be able to bid directly into things like the BEIS Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, and can also get involved in things like the Prime Minister's Business Council initiative. But for the smaller partners out there, such as my own organisation, Connect, the WICA Consortium initiative has been absolutely critical to us being able to access funding through SHDF. Without it, we wouldn't be in the game. So the role that WICA has to play in coordinating those consortia efforts is really, really, really important. And it being able to adapt its processes in order to access that funding at relatively short notice was really impressive, and you know, has enabled us to access the funding that Nadia talked about earlier on, and now we're awaiting the announcement of Wave 2.1. The local authority partners have been accessing funding for years through retrofit programs in the private sector using the Better Homes Yorkshire delivery framework has been mentioned. I think across all those different streams, the important thing is to say that we're all working here on a common agenda, but it's fair to say there's a lot more we could do to make those connections better and, you know, benefit from the collective scale that we're working at, creating an overall bigger impact. And I think that's an important part of how social housing can contribute to the overall Better Homes Hub agenda. Secondly, the one-stop shop. Now, social landlords, as I've kind of indicated already, we come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, from sort of the mega organisations that work across the whole country and have a couple of 100,000 homes in the largest case, through medium-sized providers like Connect Housing that work on a regional or sub-regional basis, right down to tiny community-based organisations with a few handfuls of properties in a particular locality. Now, some larger providers may have very little need to access one-stop shop services because they work at scale where they already have that capacity and expertise within their own organisations. It'll still be necessary to engage them in strategic area-based working to help the scaling up agenda, and they may be a valuable contributor with that skills and knowledge that they've acquired in helping to resource the one-stop shop model as part of the partnership. Most likely the smaller organisations may have more of a need to draw directly on the services that the one-stop shop model provides, because they don't have that capacity in-house, or they don't have they're much like an ordinary householder, they're as confused and bewildered by the array of retrofit offers that are potentially out there. And so, yeah, the one-stop shop trusted offer can be a really important resource for those smaller organisations as well. The trick is going to be to join up that activity to maximise the added value that we can achieve. And then there's finally the area-based demonstrators. Now, I think the role here for social housing providers is critical, but as yet is untested. But the principle is that as providers, we can be important anchor investors in those demonstrator neighbourhoods, helping to build a critical mass upon which the wider cross-tenure programmes are delivered. Now that's going to be particularly important in cross-tenure neighbourhoods where joined-up action is needed. So let's say you've got a street of properties and social housing providers own maybe a quarter of them, owner-occupiers own another 50%, and private rented landlords own the other quarter. You know, that collective action, the social housing providers can potentially provide a good starting point on which we can then engage other property owners. It's not just about procurement efficiency, but it's also about demonstrating what's possible and building that trusted offer in the community.
Thank you. Okay, next slide, please, Sam. There we go. So, just to give you a quick summary of the progress to date and what we've done. Firstly, internal assurance has enabled development funding to increase resource within the combined authority from just under 2 full-time equivalents to 4 full-time equivalent colleagues in West Yorkshire Combined Authority for retrofit. This team was literally put fully in place just before Christmas, so it was a good Christmas present for us. Secondly, scoping for the demonstrator projects with our district partners is commencing this week. Thirdly, the CRF Manium scheme has been completed, and Ariba is going to take you through the key learnings for that, which have proved invaluable for you. And then after that, I'll take you through the social housing and decarbonisation fund, which is already in delivery. Do I hand you over to Ariba?
Thanks, Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ariba Rashid, and I'm a project manager for the Better Homes Hub programme. So this past year, I have been delivering the Community Renewal Fund
programme, the Retrofit Hub scheme. And just to give you a very quick overview, this was a pilot project that was delivered across 2 areas in Bradford to test what challenges there are in retrofitting pre-1990 installed built properties and to support training in the green economy. So delivery commenced in January 2022, and we had the aim to deliver 100 whole house plans to residents living in Manningham and Toller Ward in Bradford, which are low income areas, and provide 40 adult learners with the skills, technical knowledge and experience needed to work in the growing green sector. By November 2022, the scheme had engaged with over 1,400 households, delivered 150 whole house retrofit plans, developed an architectural toolkit of retrofit designs and plans to demonstrate to residents what these installations could look like on their homes, as well as supporting 5 adult learners in a introductory retrofit module. Now, throughout the delivery, we've been making and logging all the key lessons learned that have arisen during delivery, and we've shared this extensively internally, and where appropriate, these lessons learned will be used in the development of the Better Homes Hub. But what I wanted to highlight to this committee are 4 key lessons that I've pulled out just to discuss a bit further. The first key learning is retrofit is a term that is not well known outside the retrofit construction industry. Therefore, a twin track approach is needed with community engagement and awareness raising. Targeted community engagement will help secure resident buy-in, manage expectations and help empower households to improve the living conditions of their properties. Therefore, we need to consider creative ways to engage with communities that utilises translation services and interactive software that demonstrates to residents what impact they can make towards reducing their fuel bills, as well as empowering households to improve the conditions of their properties. One of the successes of this scheme was the utilisation and presence of bilingual local volunteers and community champions who were well known in the area, provided a level of legitimacy to our scheme and provided the translation support between the technical suppliers as well as ourselves. So therefore, some reflection may be needed on how we can include these local communities going forward in any future engagement activities on retrofit. The second key learning is, and I'm pretty sure this is not going to come as a surprise to the committee, is we need to have a bit of a think about where the funding is going to come from to deliver retrofit. So within the Manningham Retrofit Hub scheme, the average cost of work for each property came up to £31,000. This does not include costs associated with material maintenance and repair. For low-income residents, that's a lot of money to be committed to retrofit. And as mentioned by Nadia earlier on in the presentation, is the impact of costs this will have on private landlords who are less likely to invest into these works simply because they will not directly benefit from retrofit, and there could be a risk that we'll be excluding landlords, the private rented sector, as well as those landlords who own and lease more than one property out within the area that they live in. So that's something that we need to be a bit mindful of. The third lesson that I wanted to highlight is there are technical challenges facing stone-built properties, one of which is due to the way that these properties were originally built, there's not enough room to insulate internally, and therefore we've had to think about what features could be retrofitted externally onto properties. Recently in the news there's been a lot of discussion about the moisture that's been generated in homes and the problems with the damp, mould and condensation. This was actually identified by our surveyors when they were going around surveying properties, and what they informed us is that these issues need to be resolved before we can even consider retrofit installations. So there could be other issues present within households that we really need to have at the forefront of our mind before we start thinking about whole house retrofits, because we really do want to maximise the benefits that can arise from installations. And other technical challenges that we face are how do we balance the needs of sustainability against the preservation of heritage features whilst having a housing stock that is fit for purpose, because retrofitting properties within conservation areas have their own challenges in terms of the planning restrictions in place, and how do we bring on board the planning authorities. Initial discussions have started with Bradford Council Planning and Conservation team, which we are going to try and take forward within the hub as well as Historic England. And finally, before I hand back to Sarah, there is a lack of appetite within the community to take up the offer of free skills training. And again, this links back to the lack of understanding of what retrofit is. We need to ensure that any future skills programmes are designed which align with current employment opportunities. And what we found were many learners want to know what jobs there are once they've completed training, and we just need to maybe do a bit more engagement with employers before we start developing skills programmes. Again, I've shared this with the Green Task Force and the skills team, and I think that's enough from me, so I'll pass on to Sarah, who will talk about the Social Housing Decarbonisation Programme. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariba. So the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which is SHDF because it's too much of a mouthful, is funded by BEIS. It's a 3.8 billion commitment over a 10-year period, and it's to improve the energy performance of socially rented properties on the pathway to net zero. It is supplemented, in fact, it has to have match funding by the social landlords, the registered providers. To date, 3 distinct programmes have been brought forward under the SHDF banner. I should know by now. Firstly, Wave 1. Wave 1 is a 10.38 million programme of retrofits to just over 1,300 social housing properties. This is across West Yorkshire. The consortium delivering Wave 1 is a combination of registered providers of social housing, varying in size and retrofit experience, and the consortium is led by the Combined Authority. This is the same consortium that Martin's referred to. And the funding by BEIS ends of March this year. The scheme has had many challenging technical requirements, and it has been a phenomenally steep learning curve, I think, for most providers that would agree. But the consortium is actually a good, strong consortium. There is a good working relationship. There's been a lot of sharing of lessons learned, and I think it's a consortium that can work ahead and do further work, as Martin's already talked about. Payment of the grant by BEIS is subject to each property achieving a minimum level of energy efficiency of C, and the works have to be required to a quality level within the industry known as PAS 2035. The measures include things such as cavity wall insulation, solid wall insulation, and some low carbon heating technologies such as air source heat pumps, but the focus is on fabric first. So progress to date on Wave 1. As of December 22, 615 properties, that's 47%, have been completed, with a further 260 in delivery. However, there is a significant risk of not achieving approximately 400 properties, and other issues such as DNOs and technical constraints have resulted in the need for 2 change requests. The first change request, which has been approved by BEIS, requires minor changes to the programme and measures and does not affect the overall total and spend. The second change request is awaiting approval to change the measures, extend the programme and reduce the outputs. The issues in delivery for this include inaccurate surveys with regards to cavity wall insulation, challenges in applying cavity wall insulation to flats. You need everybody to be in at the same time to switch the gas off, which is unbelievable, but also technical constraints with the implementation of internal wall insulation, which Reba's already referred to. However, work is still continuing with these 2 providers and with the rest of the consortium to try and deliver additional properties that will meet the base requirements and get us closer to that 1,300 property total. So the funding from BEIS does finish at the end of March, but we haven't given up yet. We're still trying, and we'll submit a report as soon as we can when we have the final figures, but we are still working with that. I would like to take this opportunity just to say that it has been incredibly challenging, but the social housing providers have been amazing. They have been, many of them have been under-resourced, but it has been a genuine team effort, and it's all credit to the Housing Partnership the next time you see them. In terms of these changes, notice of these changes was discussed with the Deputy Chair of the Committee and advised to the committee members by email, and a formal change request will be progressed through the internal insurance framework as soon as we have the final figures for you. So that is SHDF Wave 1. Key learnings, as I said before, it's been a steep learning curve for everyone. Interestingly enough, there's been some workshops with local authorities throughout the country, and they've all had the same challenges, and these have been summarised and presented to BEIS by the UK Green Building Council. General learnings have been property surveys, survey. Do as many surveys as you can before you submit the bid to SHDF. Have a reserve list of properties, so that when you do have issues, you've got a reserve list there. incorporate extra measures. Don't wait for one measure to achieve that EPCC. Throw in LED lighting, throw in extras to guarantee that you're going to hit that EPCC rating. We've got an issue on roughly 60 properties where the work's been done, the tenant has a warmer, more comfortable house, but we officially haven't achieved the EPCC, and BEIS are withholding the funding from the provider for that, which we have contested, and we're still trying to lobby on their behalf. Other learnings reflect what Ariba's experienced, and is having very early engagement with the planning authorities. Social housing providers have permitted development, but planning authorities are still very much interested, especially in external wall insulation. So it's getting that early involvement. There's loads of learnings, but they're in the report. I could go on all afternoon, and I won't do. So SHDF Wave 2, a bid was submitted in November. We have a consortium again of 9 providers. 6 of the providers are original members from Wave 1, and we have 3 new additional social housing providers. A summary of Wave 2 is we're looking at just over 2,400 properties. Again, the measures are predominantly focused on Fabric First. The total funding requirement is over 31 million, but 53% of that is co-funded by the housing providers. There's an additional submission under digitalisation, and this is in partnership with the University of Huddersfield, who are doing some really great work on software. And the aim of that will be to develop a software package that is portable and easy to use, to enhance resident engagement, to enhance the design, and also to work more closely with planning in terms of securing planning issues and things such, for example, as such listed buildings, etc. The results of the bid will be announced at the end of February. We keep asking, but we're going to have to wait till the end of February on that one, I'm afraid. But assuming we are successful, we will have until the end of September 2025 to deliver that work. And all of the learnings from Wave 1 have been shared with all the participants of Wave 2, and all of that was shared in advance of the submission of the bid for Wave 2. So we would really hope we've taken all the learnings and made a stronger bid for Wave 2. The third element of SHDF is the booster programme. This is a response to the cost of living crisis, which was caused by the rise in inflation and the increase in the energy prices, which has already been talked about. It also reflected the delivery constraints that we were experiencing in Wave 1, which Martin can share the pain on. So this is an additional investment of just over 5 million mayoral gain share and 2 million match funding, again focusing on insulation. And whilst the works will impact on the EPC grade, we are not sort of, the work is not constrained on delivering a certain grade of EPCC or EPCB. The main focus of this booster project is to enhance the warmth and comfort of residents in social housing. It's going to be, well, it is being delivered with Wave 1 Consortium. We've got this good relationship going, and it's going to focus on lower income households, those most likely to be affected by fuel poverty. The energy efficiency measures will be installed in roughly 1,700 properties, all social housing, and all in areas of high deprivation. We received approval towards the end of October, but works commenced in December. We've managed to deliver improvements in 62 properties, with a lot more work happening in January. So that's a sort of a summary on SHDF. I think one more piece of work that we'd like to reflect. Could we go on to the next slide, please, Sam? So this is an exciting piece of work, and this is by Leeds City Council, and it's led by George Munson, and George has very kindly agreed to join us if you have any questions. On this, I'll quickly summarise it, but it's an important project, and it's a potential demonstrator project, and it's focused on the able to pay. You can see the partnership that's been developed there, which has the key sort of delivery partners that you need. This is focusing on able to pay for 2 reasons. Firstly, this able to pay represents 60% of the retrofit market, and also it's generally been overlooked since the end of the Green Deal, which I believe finished about 2015, was it? Yep, 2015. Under the banner of Local Retrofit Accelerator, this partnership will seek to address the 3 core challenges. It's a complex customer journey, we've already talked about that. It's a fractured supply chain, and it's an unattractive financial proposition. There are strong synergies between the Local Retrofit Accelerator and the Better Homes Hub, and the potential of that we think could be fully developed with close partnership working. I don't know if you want me to stop, if you have any questions about this in particular, or to wait at the end.
Yeah, I think if we can just get to the end quickly, I want to make sure we do have the opportunity to have a discussion as well.
Okay, that's fine. So next slide, please, Sam. We're nearly there. It's been a bit of a marathon. So how are we on time scale? So social housing will still continue to deliver until September 25. That is on the assumption that we're successful with Wave 2. Now that we have a team in place, development work can commence at pace on the one-stop shop and on the demonstrators, as well as working on the key work streams of finance, supply chain and comms. So a lot of that development work is starting now, but will be at full throttle between now and September. And the next slide is any questions? And you're all still with us, thank you.
And a cute owl, so thank you very much for that. Well, the committee did ask for an update on the Better Homes Hub, and may I say, you certainly did not disappoint, so thank you very much for a really comprehensive update. There is so much to digest. We're being asked as a committee to discuss the overall scope of the Hub programme, and also specifically any opportunities for demonstrator projects as a sort of one-stop shop. So that's the sort of the focus we're being asked for. I can see a couple of contributions now, so I'll pass to Richard first, if I may, and then Andrew, and I suggest we try, and then Katie. So let's grab 3 comments, and I'll pass back to the team to respond.
So number one, I'll completely fail on the questions the committee are asked to deal with, since I don't really have any demonstrator projects. But come back to the theme I said earlier, it's always struck me, because I was involved in the LEP, like when it started back in the day, that this area of social housing and homes has always been an area of attention in West Yorkshire. And going back to what I said previously about what we want to be famous for, assuming going forward other regions are looking for more funding, I'm guessing that I think West Yorkshire is possibly ahead of a lot of other regions in its understanding of the challenges, and actually maybe also basically the amount of houses you've actually managed to do under this, these sorts of different areas. And that may or may not be right, but that's this has always been an area of focus in a way that, I don't know, PV hasn't been an area of focus, for example, over the period. So that first point is I commend that. The second one, it just caught my eye, was the Leeds Prime Minister. I didn't realise Tracy was being called the Prime Minister, but hey ho. Leeds Prime Minister's Business Council. That's if I've got that right, that's the homeowners. So that's an utterly different class from most of what you've looked at so far. Yeah. So it's So most of this is social housing. As a very loose statement, is that right? That this is actually quite a distinct area of homeowners.
Yeah, you can do it.
Well, you said you wanted to take all 3 questions.
Yeah, if we can just gather them sort of from the committee there, and then we'll sort of pass for a brief response at the end.
Yeah, and it's more of it's an observation than a question. I will shut up after this. Most energy suppliers, so I work for Octopus, OVO, I can keep going, but anyway, a whole stack of them. This area is a holy grail for them. So you should get a lot of energy and focus out of someone like Octopus in this space. The reason being is they don't particularly want to just provide energy moving forward. They want to capture the castle, and the way they can capture the castle is if they're putting in heat. So the point is, this is an example where the private sector, you shouldn't have to drag them with you on this one. They should be beating down your door, really, around this whole topic, because that market's not been able to solve it. The only people who's gotten anywhere close in owner-owned housing is the Centrica model that we've all seen with Hive. That's been around for absolutely ages. So just an observation, I think you've got a fair wind with you on that one. I'll shut up now.
Right, thank you, Richard. That's helpful. Andrew?
One of the thoughts I had on this was the sort of focus on EPCC as being somehow or other the way of measuring success. I do sort of wonder whether we're going to have to go back again, and maybe one of the things we ought to be saying to government is you yourselves are reviewing the EPC system, probably because of some of the problems about it. Do we actually want to have a whole house once we've been and gone, or do we want an incremental approach, which we don't actually? We don't want to come back again to do the same house later on. So I think that's a message we need to pass home quite strongly. 680,000 homes need retrofitting. I'd have thought it'd be like X million, 80-90% of all homes in West Yorkshire require retrofitting. I was surprised that it was so low in lots of ways. And is that about the not at level C, which brings me back to the other point, so I did look at that and think, well, that's actually possibly a bit low. So how we measure success, I think, is important. Are we going to do air pressure testing to look at what we've achieved? Are we going to make sure that the rebound effect in terms of the gains that people have had from the installations doesn't happen, and that they actually have that when they do have the measures put in, that they get the benefits right the way through the house's life. So that's important. I saw in 2.25 that there was a bit of a focus on cavity wall insulation, loft insulation in social housing demonstrator. Is there much left to do? Is there actually much? Because I'm thinking of all the programmes, some of which I was involved with when I worked at Kirklees as an energy efficiency coordinator. I thought we'd done it, but obviously there must be some left. But I was surprised that there was a bit of a focus on that. Exciting stuff about the PM Business Council, and I think the way that we're going to actually make this work is by and having a compelling model to get the owner-occupied sector to get the measures done is releasing in some way the equity in people's own homes, so they can get £30,000 or £50,000 worth of measures, but not feel it themselves. So that I think that's the way that we're going to do this. And I think when we hover around it, we're not going to get that amount of money from government. That's not going to happen. It'd be great if it did. But we did a project a number of years ago in Kirklees, the Recharge scheme, where we got solar and renewables installations where we did get a second charge on the property, and that was incredibly successful. What we do need, of course, is to underwrite those what will effectively be loans in the short term. But if it's a revolving loan fund, then the money's coming back at some point, and so I think that's a model which we can do, maybe using the loans team that we've got operating at Sheffield City Council to administer that. So there's a few thoughts.
Thank you, Andrew. I'll go to Katie and then Leah.
Thank you. So, in terms of a job, it's a huge job, isn't it? I dread to think of the amount of work that's involved in making some of the projects that we've started in demonstrator projects scale up. Did you say 26% of emissions were from domestic properties? It's an enormous job, but if we're going to meet our targets, then it absolutely has to be a priority. So I definitely think this is something that we have to have at the top of our agenda. Some comments from me. So the barriers that you mentioned at the beginning in terms of lack of knowledge, accessing trusted advice. If we're looking at people doing work on their own homes, I think that's absolutely crucial, and I think a hub will play a really important part in that, in giving people the confidence and also the knowledge that they need and where to go in terms of a supplier. You mentioned at some point the idea of a whole house approach, and I think that's really important, and whether there are opportunities to take advantage of when people are involved in a major project. The homeowners at some point will have a new kitchen, or they may be looking an extension, a new roof. Can we take advantage of times when people are having big pieces of work done on their homes and do retrofit work with that? I think, funding's been mentioned. I mean, that's absolutely vital, and we need to be able to look at where we're getting funding for kind of big social projects as well as individuals, and enabling people to take advantage of that. And there must be ways to do that. The comms, I think, is really, really important. If we don't get that right, then we miss a trick in terms of enabling people to have retrofit work done. I know that's always a problem. Skills has been mentioned before as well, but if this is going to be rolled out at scale, then we really need to make sure we're ready to go with people to actually carry out that work. Question I had about the one-stop shop. Have there been thoughts about what shape that will take? Is it going to be something virtual? Will there be physical one-stop shops where people can actually go and get advice? And then the demonstrators, I mean, you did a brilliant job, Ariba, of talking about the learning from that project, and I think that's absolutely crucial. I think it's something that we all need to be really aware of, and in Leeds as well, with the project that you've talked about, Prime Minister's Business Council, can before it starts learn from ones that have already happened, but then a real key point of that, I think, needs to be to move that learning across the area. What else did I have down? Engagement, I think that kind of goes with the one-stop shop, but I think it's absolutely vital that we have engagement. Somebody mentioned that lots of people have no idea what the word retrofit means, and I think that's probably really true. So that's kind of goes with the comms idea, doesn't it? That there's not much point kicking out a big piece of work that involves the word retrofit if people don't know what it means. And just finally, you know, being from Leeds, the demonstrator project you've talked about that George is involved in is hugely exciting, and offers us a really good learning opportunity. So I wanted to say thank you for your work on that, George. And then come in with a question, really, that Richard said that energy providers should be beating down your door to get involved. Is that the case? Is there anything you want to share from your work so far?
Yeah, absolutely.
George, sorry.
Would you like to come to the table if you'd like to answer, George? And in the interest of time, I'm going to continue allowing the committee to sort of make the comments, then we'll just do a very brief wrap up in the end so that we don't sacrifice. But welcome to the table, George. If you'd like to answer that question, sorry.
So yes, I mean the interesting thing with the Prime Minister's Business Council is that it's a Prime Minister's Business Council. For those who don't know, it's a group of businesses that the Prime Minister has kind of co-opted onto a central advisory body to help with UK PLC to make the right decisions to tackle big challenges. And there's a small group, Lloyds, Octopus, Shell, and National Grid, who've been working on low carbon. So they approached Leeds back in the summer to look at what sort of challenges we thought there were in the low carbon housing area. We identified the able to pay for some of the reasons that Sarah outlined in terms of it being an overlooked area that has really been ignored since the end of the Green Deal. Leeds has got lots of good experience of doing work in the able to pay sector. We did a piece of work with our credit union several years ago now, where we gave loans to householders through the credit union, 0% interest. We got 0% default on those loans, so there's clearly an appetite, but they were done in a very scattergun kind of approach. So they were done all over the city, and so the quality of the workmanship and the efficiencies weren't great. Since the kind of end of the Green Deal, we've done a huge amount of work on area-based fuel poor projects, so the sort of thing that we've been talking about in Manningham, but actually doing the works rather than just doing the surveys. And for me, it's not rocket science, but that's the thing that helps people to understand what retrofit is. You actually do the work. If you see a neighbour having the work done, you will talk and you will see that. So in Holbeck, we've done 2 phases, both supported through the Combined Authority. Second phase, we achieved almost 100% take up, because people could see what their neighbours had done a year or 2 before, and there was a huge amount of interest. So what we've been doing with the Prime Minister's Business Council is taking that kind of hyper-local approach, working very closely with the community, working with the landlords, working with those kind of community influencers, and trying to understand if that concept would work in a more affluent neighbourhood. So we've been doing a lot of work within Chapel Allerton to look at kind of how this would work. We feel that it would work. The critical thing is having a very strong customer journey, so excellent customer journey, so people will sell the benefit to their neighbours, and having a financial offer which is available to everyone. Everyone has very different approaches to finance. Some want to use their own savings, some might want to extend their mortgage, some will just need to have a loan from somewhere that's affordable. So we've been working with Lloyds and Arup and have put a application into the Green Home Finance Accelerator to develop a property-linked finance proposition, which would work separately to a kind of a hand-holded approach within Chapel Allerton. Would be complementary. So we want to have it independent, so there's no issue of conflict of interest, but have it there underpinning the offer. So yeah, we're very excited. We think the private sector is very excited about doing work within a community. Lloyds in particular can see the benefit would bring. Octopus are interested in what they can deliver on a kind of a national level, so they're interested in some of the lighter touch measures, but they do like the concept. But you know, we think it's something that we could structure and run a demonstrator within Leeds, but with a view to then rolling it out across the rest of West Yorkshire through the Better Homes Hub.
That's great. Thank you for that update and for joining us for it. I think that sort of, private sector bringing to the party and benefiting from that public-private partnership is the only way we're going to be able to accelerate that. So I think that context is helpful, and anything our private sector members of this committee can do to encourage the private sector to sort of, form the queue, the better. So I think if I could now go to Leah and then Gideon to sort of finish the committee comments on this paper.
Hi, I had a sort of question about how do we know that these interventions on these homes has been effective? And I think it's sort of building on what Andrew was saying as well. Are we asking about, I know we've achieved the EPCC, but are we asking about household bills? Are we asking about kind of real lived experience change for people? And I also want to, I'm looking at your slide, which is on page 79 of my pack, which has the curve where you were talking about how much money you spend and how much benefit you get. And I wanted to kind of question whether, is EPC right? If you were trying to make every single house totally airtight, you're spending a lot of money, but we have targets to meet. So have you got an idea what the right level is to be able to achieve our targets? Because we could spend £100,000 on each house, but it only gets us 5% more benefit. Whereas if do we have an idea of that level? And then circling back to that first conversation we had about how this meets our climate emissions reduction pathway, what's the right level to go for each house? Is about 32k per house spend, is that the right level? And if we spend that on multiple houses, we can only spend the money once, can't we? And it's how we get the most effectiveness out of that. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that. And then, it was one of your challenges. You said something about Purda and how it was being political. I thought, is this political? Surely it's not political. Like, really? So I did wonder about that. That was just a very small comment. And then about the overall programme, do you anticipate it getting cheaper as more properties are rolled out and we get a sort of more efficient supply chain? That would be nice, wouldn't it? That's my comments.
Thank you, Leah. And I'm going to be slightly unpopular by just asking if we just keep those as rhetorical questions for now. We are very grateful to the team to capture them, and also for Ben, who is frantically typing away everything that we're saying. So I actually had a similar point about the prioritisation and the Pareto analysis of how do we get the 80% for the 20%, and what is that? So I think that's a really important one to sort of pick up. I'm sure the team might come back to that when I ask them to sort of summarise overall. So thank you. If I can then go to Gideon and Jim, and then that will be the sort of end of comments from our group.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a big long list, but I'll keep it really short. just a few things to be aware of. I was involved with the Each Home Counts consultation, which was a government consultation about how you do these things and looking at one-stop shops and things like that. So happy to have that conversation and where that goes. In terms of the skills side of it, that is a massive part of it. And that was the thing that was holding up pretty much every project that's gone through with these. Like I was in charge of the microgeneration certification scheme, and seeing that ramping up of the actual industry again came down to, if you want quality, you have to have some kind of recognition system in place. So Each Home Counts was talking about that. I don't think they've really got there with it, but we certainly should think about certification accreditation, or certainly how we vet the people who are doing this would be useful. Future Homes Standard is about to come out for consultation, as is the EPC. I think Andrew mentioned briefly. There's quite a lot of work on that EPC stuff going on that may well have quite a significant change on what's going on. It's not been the best of programs. Just to think about a couple of other places to look, and that would be Northern Ireland for retrofit for the social housing. The Northern Ireland Housing Executive did a huge piece of work on that, and there's a really good report on there. The chair of the Northern Ireland Housing Executive actually is based in Kirklees, and we can introduce you to him. That's Prof. Peter Roberts, and he can tell a very interesting story on that one. And ERA has another scheme which is about the pay scheme, and that might be an interesting one to look at from that. And just finally, two things. Heat pumps, 665,000. I think the DNO will absolutely, well, I'll be polite, but they will be worried about it, because the frequency on the grid and various other things, certainly when I was involved with MCS, we had lots of conversations about that. And finally, not to put too light a point on it, but we are actually building a hell of a lot of new homes that we're going to have to retrofit in a few years. So there's plenty of work for people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gideon. The list continues to grow. Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Thank you, Mark. Just a short list from me. But yeah, I haven't got anything to add to what's a really comprehensive bit of work, and I think it's the thing I particularly like about it is the linking together of the 60% in the Leeds project and the potential to leverage from the Better Homes and from the social sector. I think that's really powerful. I think it's really important. So, so I do work for a DNO. I work for Northern Power Grid, so we're not worried. but however, you know, I think we're really keen to learn from the lessons learned from the first phase. Really hope that we get the funding for the second phase, and that the Able to Buy project in Leeds can continue and continue to do well. So I think it's really important we do learn from the first phase, and I think it's more about the timing of these things. I know we started conversations on these, but we're really keen to have those conversations about where the projects are going to be, and see what we can do to share data and vice versa, to make sure that we can support both the project and whatever happens in terms of the wider scaling up and hitting those big targets, big numbers. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jim, and thank you, everyone. I'm going to pass, if I may, to the team for maybe a totally unfair ask, which would be a minute to sort of respond to the general points here before we, I'm afraid, have to move on to our last three topics of the agenda.
Gosh, I think a lot of the point you've seen we've all been rapidly writing, and I think a lot of the points you've made we know are huge pieces of work. So I think where we talked about the one-stop shop, where we've talked about the Leeds scheme and the demonstrators, there are these large work streams underpinning it in terms of the finance model. But we are hearing good things about different finance models, where There are some that are very much public sector based and they're seeing a good return. They're not getting much defaulting. So I think the finance model is something that we will be able to deliver. Customer engagement, we've got this huge learning from the scheme that Reba's done. We've got fantastic learning from the social housing providers who've literally been knocking on the doors and talking to people and reassuring them. So there's a lot of experience there on the customer engagement that we can build in. There's some really useful tips here, thank you, and you've offered some information, so we'll be in touch. DNO, I would say to Jim, we've been working with one or two of your colleagues at Northern Power Grid, and they have managed to help us with some of the DNOs, and we are liaising with them on Wave 2, so we're passing the information on the DNO requirements for Wave 2 so they can try and coordinate it. But yeah, we're very aware that the demand that air source heat pumps would put on the electrical infrastructure is immense. That there's some bigger projects coming out of here that go beyond our scope. I think all I can say is that we're up to full strength now, and you know we'll crack on with it. I think it feels like the committee has identified issues that we're already aware of and that we're already starting work on, and we'll keep you updated with progress. But certainly where you've offered information or offered support, we'll gladly accept that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you to everyone who has been involved in pulling together such great learnings in particular in one place and sort of to have everything together. I think the key takeouts from myself were, you know, those learnings were so valuable to sort of recognise and to go. And I think as we go forward and we have to make some difficult prioritisation decisions and we're, you know, bidding for funding, how do we make sure we get that sort of Pareto sort of rule of benefit and also get the learnings so that we find ourselves in a position of, you know, at least delivering or over delivery rather than what we have found, which is rightly, you know, through the learnings we've been a bit on the short side of delivery. And I think just seeing the breadth and depth of expertise in some of the comments coming back is a wonderful example for where sort of committees like this can add value. But I guess I would stress that it's not just about the committee, and it's those direct conversations that hopefully will happen, you know, with the team and individual members of this committee as we go that will really hopefully give it the momentum that it needs. So thank you very, very much to everyone involved in that item. So just a quick time check, we're just before 4 o'clock, we have 3 items left. My suggestion, because the first one is transport, and at this committee any concept of transport takes a little bit longer than any other item, I propose we try to stick to sort of a 15-minute conversation about item 8 on zero emission transport. And then for the 2 updates on green jobs and pledge delivery, we try to sort of keep those as sort of 5 to 10 minute items if we can. So I guess if I could then pass to Rosianna for zero emission transport item 8. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So I put together a report outlining some of the work we're doing on decarbonisation of transport. So I won't, conscious of time, I won't repeat what's in the paper, just to give a quick overview. Essentially the paper is outlining where we're focusing our efforts on decarbonisation, and it's about how we're decarbonising vehicles, but also looking at how we travel and how often we need to travel. And that's part of the work we're doing on the new local transport plan. And as part of this work, we're developing a vision for a zero carbon transport vision and a series of accompanying strategies and action plans, looking at fuel types as well as transport modes. And this includes looking at hydrogen as well as electric vehicles, buses and freight. And alongside this piece, this is complemented by work we're doing on air quality to update our existing low emission strategy for West Yorkshire. And the idea is that this will then sit us alongside our carbon aspirations, but also updated to reflect the kind of changing and emphasis in the national arena to include areas such as particulate matter alongside nitrogen dioxide. So that's quite a whistle-stop tour, but I'll leave it there and open it to discussion and questions.
Regina, that's an incredibly helpful whistle-stop tour for the sake of timing on the agenda. And I think certainly I have been aware that there are different pockets of work on strategy that are going on across the combined authority, and actually getting visibility and sight of how they connect together in sort of 2.7 and an update on where we are with things are really good. I did potentially because of some conversations, want to maybe pick up on hydrogen strategy, and I know that was on the sort of forward-looking plan for this committee, and just to sort of get a realistic view of sort of where we are with that and when we might be able to discuss it at this committee. We can do that now or potentially at the end, and I guess I'd certainly also like to open this up to any other members who have got any questions on this item, which we're being asked to note. After saying that, we've exhausted our energies on the last item. So, on hydrogen, is that yourself, Rosianna, or Liz?
I would also like to bring a Noel on this one.
So I think on hydrogen, it's an interesting proposition. I think there is quite a lot of work happening at different levels. So we know of the work that is happening on the East Coast. I mean, there's happening around the country, but we are particularly interested in what's happening on the East Coast. Because we think of the ability for us as a region to tap into that as needed. So I think in terms of a strategy, in my mind, and maybe this one for discussion, I don't necessarily see it as here's a document where we try and pull this together. I think there are different strands that we are trying to work on. One is, like I say, that regional, how the region fits in with the national picture. And I think I'm particularly interested in how we might develop, I think, what we're calling a kind of user case. So how we might bring forward a particular example of using hydrogen. And we have been talking, for example, to Bradford, who are kind of interested in developing something around a kind of refuelling station. So when we use the word strategy, it's maybe in a slightly lighter touch way of saying, here's a document, because I'm more interested in how we actually take forward some of the work that's happening. In terms of timing, I'll talk to the team about what we might be able to bring back either to the next committee or the one after. I would like to be able to have a proper conversation around it. So I would like to just kind of think about the right timing of that, if that's all right. But I don't know, Noel, do you want to add anything?
I'd just kind of add to what Liz is kind of saying in terms of the first real important pillar of this is really to understand the use case for hydrogen within West Yorkshire. There is a lot of kind of suggestions around where it might or may not fit within the kind of mix of decarbonisation within West Yorkshire. So it's really important for us to have that very transparent and unbiased view about where that really fits within the mix of everything, how it relates to kind of the transport, how it relates to our homes, if at all. And so that use case piece is really quite fundamental to how we take forward hydrogen within West Yorkshire within the future. So that's kind of our immediate focus when it comes to the hydrogen piece.
Thank you, Noel. And there's a couple of members that will pass. The reason for asking hydrogen, when we had this energy roundtable in November, I think some of our larger energy users were keen to point out that it felt we needed to be a bit more proactive as a region on hydrogen, and it felt like a gap in particular versus some other regions. The other reason is at a Northern Powerhouse level, there is a lot of excitement, and I'm keen to make sure that as a region we play a leading role across the Northern Powerhouse. So I'll go to Andrew first and then Gideon on.
Just on hydrogen, I think there's a need for us to focus on green hydrogen because we can get ourselves wrapped up in the fossil fuel industry. So I think there's something to be said there. The other thing is, going over our borders a little bit. There's a lot of good work being done on green hydrogen in Sheffield. The work they've got, the technology park there in Sheffield. I think it's linked to the University of Sheffield. So I think maybe there's some collaboration that we could do in the neighbouring region.
Great, thank you, Andrew. And Gideon.
Yeah, thank you. I would totally endorse what Noel said. Right, there is huge amounts of discussion going on, which I've been involved with some of, about the use cases, whether we go and do it in homes or not, whether cars should be involved in it or not. We do have, and we've been looking at opportunities for hydrogen range extenders on electric vehicles, electric trucks, and I think the big commercial, and then the intensive industries are very much part of that. What I would say in terms of electric vehicles is that we seem to be quite short on hub charging. While we have a lot of individual charge points for the rapid chargers out there in the Wicked did a lot of good work with the 80 odd that went in. Unfortunately, they're not the best of chargers that we've had or in the area. But as an electric car user, we're now getting to a point where you don't look for the site with one or even two chargers anymore, because you're looking for somewhere where you need a lot of them. Because if everyone's there, you need to have that rapid turnover. So it'd be useful to have that conversation about how we develop that side of it, and I think it's very important because everything seems to get focused quite a lot down south at the moment, and there's some good opportunities there for us.
Okay, thank you, Gideon, and thank you, Andrew. Are there any other comments that we'd like to make on this paper? No, so we're being asked to note it. Thank you very much for bringing it all together and for the committee's attention. So we'll move now, if we may, to item 9, an update on the Green Job Task Force. And I think Liz is about to tell me that it's not Michelle, but it's going to be Sonia.
Please.
Sonia, would you like to come to the table? If you sit in one of those empty chairs, we will pick you up as a new voice on the live streaming. Thank you.
So, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting us to the committee. Michelle Hunter did plan to come and speak to you all today, and you may have heard that she's been stuck in some of the flooding that's happening outside of Bradford Interchange. So I just wanted to share an update on the Green Jobs Task Force in terms of an overview and the next steps, but also really to seek your views to help shape and influence some of the emerging recommendations of the Mayor's Green Jobs Task Force as well. So most of the detail is covered in your paper, but just by way of overview, the task force was created and is chaired by the Mayor in order to help West Yorkshire think about the deliverable actions in relation to employment and skills and the creation of green jobs and any interventions that are needed to support those. It was always time bound, it was always going to take place over the course of the year, and its final meeting will take place in February next month, where it will report on its final recommendations. So in your paper, in summary, you have a couple of key pieces of work the task force have undertaken over the past few months, including 2 pieces of research, one of which is a youth engagement programme that has worked with 174 young people, diverse range of people, I should say, from across each of the local authority areas, but also in terms of socio-economic and academic backgrounds. The main findings of the summary, the main findings of the programme, in summary, were that one of the main barriers for young people is a lack of understanding around what green jobs and careers are, which I'm sure many of you will have heard before. But pleasingly, after completing the programme, young people had a much better understanding of what those opportunities are, and 82% of them would go on to consider a career in one of those areas. So that's definitely a space where I think there is further action we could undertake to help young people make those better informed choices. The second piece of research was commissioned to undertake a deep dive into West Yorkshire's green economy, including its jobs, skills, requirements, and what else might need to happen across West Yorkshire. And the research showed us that it's actually one of the highest areas for potential growth with the right policy interventions. So it's estimated that by 2030, green jobs will grow by almost 10,000 jobs in West Yorkshire, and the areas where there will be the largest growth are around climate adaptation, green professional research services, and homes and buildings. So we've used that research and the wider intelligence really to consult and to develop a set of emerging action recommendations, which are detailed in your report at 2.18. So hopefully you've had the chance to have a look at those. We're really keen to hear your views to help shape those recommendations before we take them to the next task force meeting in February. So I'd just like to ask committee members for their views, and in particular whether they feel that the draft recommendations are reflective of West Yorkshire's ambitions on jobs and skills in green, and whether there's anything else you think we should be considering are captured as we continue to develop these recommendations.
Thank you, Sonia, and a very clear ask of the committee, and some really helpful research, I thought, that was published in the paper. I think governance-wise, this is going through Employment and Skills Committee formally, so we're being asked to note and then again provide any sort of advice or things on emerging recommendations. Gideon, I think I saw your hand. If I could pass to you first.
Yeah, thank you. I did ask at the last meeting to get a definition of green jobs and green skills, and what turned out was exactly what I thought. Any job could be a green job, as long as you defined it as that yourself. And I'm slightly concerned about the way we're framing this, because a plumber who does heat pumps, for instance, is a green job. We've just talked about 665,000 heat pumps. You know, that is a massive amount of jobs and skills. We talked about other work with renewable energy at 30,000 people involved in it, but we're talking here about 10,000. So I just wondered if you could maybe clarify why we're so low on that in relation to what we're really talking about. Thank you.
And can I just ask for a couple of other comments as well? So can I go for Katie and Andrew first, and then I think I'll come back to Katie, Andrew, Leah further, and then I'll go to sort of Peter and then back to yourself, Sonia. So Katie.
So going back to the work that you were doing with the Ahead Partnership project, I think one of the things that came out from that is getting young people to understand what green jobs means, and I think Gideon's point's a really, really good one. But if there is going to be publicity around green jobs and talking about the future is green jobs, then if it's a term that young people don't understand, it's meaningless. And so I think in terms of the recommendations, the ones that talk about inspiring and informing young people are absolutely key. And the second one about facilitating easy access to information, I don't know whether there's the funding for something like that Ahead Partnership work to be scaled up, because giving information, i.e. there's a website, go and find out about a green job, is not really what young people need, but that really intensive work that they were doing in schools is what they need. But it is intensive, and I'm sure it doesn't come cheap. So that is, well, I think that's probably my two main things. Young people need a definition explaining, and they need some real hand-holding about how to get in there. And the results that came out of that project work with Head Partnership speak loudly to say that.
Okay, thank you, Katie. I will continue with Andrew and then Leah before. Oh. We've read it properly. Lovely. Excellent. So we'll replace Leah with Jim. So Andrew first.
Just on the target itself, the pledge, 1,000 green jobs created by the Mayor. I'm just wondering if we're on target for that. And the other questions really are about how much of that's actually verifiably down to the Mayor's actions and what the Mayor has done. Because I've heard in the past in one of these meetings that companies have sort of rung in and said, yeah, we created a green job, and then that's been accepted as, yeah, we'll put that in the register. That's one down, another 999 to go. I could have misunderstood that. I could have got that wrong. But so it's that rigour, I guess, really about the creation of those green jobs, and whether it's actually down to actions of the combined authority and the Mayor.
And I'm sure Sonia will respond to that. Jim, can I just go to you?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to be a little bit challenging on whether we have to educate or inform young people about the green economy or green jobs, because I feel like they're already there. So we've been doing a lot of recruitment recently in the power industry, and we've been talking about the ability to make a positive change and help with work we're doing to support regional decarbonisation and tackle climate change. And that's the sort of language we didn't say come work in the green economy, I suppose. it's a phrase we never used. And so, but the amount of interest we get when we sort of go out with those kind of messages and say, look, this is why you're doing the work you're doing. And a bit like the, come and work if you want to be an installer of a heat pump, because that helps to lower the emissions into the environment from heating systems. You don't have to say because it's green economy. It's almost like there's a. So I'm just sort of challenging that, I suppose. I think you can achieve the aims, and I think it's upon all of us as employers and people working on those skills, working with. I agree with absolutely with the sentiments on working with training providers and working with the supply chain, working with universities or education providers and that sort of things. But I don't think we should get too. Personally, I don't feel we should get too hooked up on labelling it as a green economy. I get it if we've got to, account for it in some way. That's a different issue. But actually, in communicating with the workforce of the future, the young people coming up, I think we just need to say it in plain language about what they're going to do, and they'll form the association. And actually, we find it's very motivating for them. Thank you.
I think that's a very fair point, Jim, and sort of the language. I certainly feel I get held to account by my 10-year-old on what I'm doing on climate change, so he'll be delighted to understand about this committee meeting today when I discuss that with him later. Sonia, and I'm not sure if Peter wants to go in, but sort of Sonia, if I could, pass to you to perhaps respond to some of those, I think, constructive and helpful challenges on some of the recommendations.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first if that's okay, and thank you. Yeah, really constructive comments, thank you. So in terms of the kind of young people piece, it's obviously an area of, as we've just spoken about, of key interest to young people. It gets them excited, they're motivated about this. So finding the right language is really important, and helping to understand what those opportunities are, I think, are really important to the future growth in West Yorkshire and for young people to make fulfil their own ambitions as well. There is something around the language we use that I think we probably need to explore more, whether in terms of understanding whether it's a green job or whether it's more about sustainability and the language that young people use. We've used the national definition, which I know is under review, and I'm sure Peter will comment on that further in a moment. But I just wanted to pick up on some of the other points as well. In terms of the number of pledges, we have had just over 1,007, I think, pledges made by employers. And there is a team that do follow up and do some verification with employers in terms of whether those jobs, whether they're verified, whether what kind of jobs they are, and so on and so forth. But there is so much more that we can do, and we recognise that, including looking at what we do as a combined authority in terms of contributing to that target. And across all of this area, we're considering within our existing employment and skills programmes and anything that's commissioned in the future, that because this is such an area of importance and such a high growth area, that we're using that research and intelligence so that future programmes have a focus on this. Yeah.
Because what I've heard you say is that they've rung and told you that they've created a green job. Now, that's not the mayor or the combined authority creating a green job. That's them saying, yeah, we've done it. And so that's the emphasis. I'm not trying to trap anybody. It's just the reality of it. I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah, I mean, it is about raising the profile and awareness as well with employers. So it's using those examples to encourage others as well. Job creation per se is quite difficult and expensive to do, but we would like, so for example, we have an employment support programme that will begin in April, and a key focus of that programme will be around helping people to get into green jobs. So what we want to do is use the opportunities where we have them to influence decisions and to create green jobs and to accelerate progress within existing business practices.
Can we just make sure that so I think what we're sort of saying is the data might not be perfect and the validation sort of may not be perfect, but the intention of getting more people into sort of new sort of green jobs is the sort of direction of travel that we're going in. Sonia. Okay. Any other points to Peter? You've been wanting to come in for a while. Apologies.
So just the one about the figures. So just to correct Sonia on that one. So the current employment in the green economy is estimated at 73,000 in West Yorkshire. That's about 7% of total employment. And the central sort of forecast for that will increase to, by 2030, is a sort of doubling. So you can see the kind of the scale of increase is very substantial, but that's predicated on what will be needed to achieve net zero. So there are other scenarios within the report which look at a projection of current trends. You know, so if the recent past was projected into the future, what would that look like? Which is obviously substantially lower, but it is a very large increase in employment that will be required. It's really a transformation of a big part of the economy.
And that large increase plays more to the point that Gideon was making initially in this section. So, yeah. Gideon, did you want to come back on that quickly?
Yeah, just very quickly. Like you said that there's going to be a targeting of the skills for green jobs, or the green jobs that from April, and the programmes going forward. But what are we talking about? Because an electrician can be a green job, a plumber can be a green job. You know, it depends what they're doing. So have you got to focus on what they're actually targeting as a green job within that, to narrow it down to something that can be, you know, visible as something that we can understand? I could go on. You know,
but let's not. Let us take that as a question, and we can either answer that now or take that away.
So I guess if you particularly promoting these jobs to young people, I think you need to demonstrate that an electrician, what their in a certain context, what their contribution to the green economy is, and the additional skills that and the additional tasks that they undertake, in order to do activity around sort of the energy sector and so on. So electricity is quite a broad occupational area. In terms of defining the jobs, the way that we do it within the study is we look at the job content. So particular jobs where that require, say, skills related to the energy sector and environmental specific skills. So there is a kind of top echelon of jobs which are very environmentally and net zero focused. So that's a certain area. But I think, as Jim was mentioning, that there are other areas where the skills can be applied in a sort of green context. So it is, and from a communication sense, I think it's about saying how these jobs contribute to the green economy, even if they're not wholly specific to green economy.
Okay, thank you, Peter. I think we will take that theme and those sort of comments there and add that into the request of advice on the emerging recommendations. So hopefully, Sonia, on that gives a sort of a helpful sort of steer from this committee on that paper. Thank you very much for coming along at short notice as well. Okay, our final item is item number 10. It's the pledge delivery update paper, which gives a view on other activity that's going on to support all of the Merrill pledges on tackling the climate emergency. I think I'm going to pass to Noel, and I think you're going to say we're going to assume the paper is read and ask questions, but I would like to give you that option, Noel.
Indeed. As Mark said, yes, you've had the paper in your pack. There is quite a lot of information in there on various different pieces of work that are also happening around this agenda. I don't intend to go through any of that really. I'll take it as read and invite any questions from the committee in relation to that paper.
Great idea, Noel. Thank you. Are there any specific questions in the information? Because the information is broken down sort of quite nicely in progress, and there are actually quite a few interesting facts there on flood risk management and there. So I think it's a really useful paper to sort of have there. So are there any specific questions or comments that anyone would like to make? Okay. Is there anyone else who would like to make a comment while Leia's computer's waking up? No. Sorry, Lo, but anything?
I think it was just a thought I had about, we were talking about the local nature recovery strategy and biodiversity net gain. And I know, because I'm working on it today actually, that Bradford Council are doing a design code, and that things like design coding is something that will help contribute to that, and that's something that Bradford is doing as Pathfinder, as a sort of experimental thing, but other local authorities will have to start doing that as well. So just sort of, I suppose it starts to enshrine it more and more in different policies and things like that. It was just a comment on that really, but and about how you achieve biodiversity net gain and the role that new developments can play in that, so as well as habitat banking and all of that kind of thing. There are things happening already that will feed into this. That was
Well, thank you for reading them. Great, so that's all the formal items on the agenda. Just by way of closing, our next meeting date is scheduled for the 21st of March. Very much look forward to seeing everybody there. And thank you for battling floods and everything to make it here today. It's been a really useful meeting, so thank you once again. See you all next time. Bye.
Thank you.